Right or wrong, good or bad. They say there are two sides to every argument. But if you're anything like me, you know that there's a lot more to the world than just that, with many subtle shades of gray making up the whole picture. And when it comes to professional wrestling, that's exactly where some characters choose to live, which made me choose them as the subject of this episode. Because today, Dave knows tweeners. There is surprisingly a lot of history and intrigue behind tweeners in wrestling. Those wonderful characters that are neither all the way heel nor all the way face. And they may also be the exact cure for today's WWE, even though there are those that deny their very existence. And we might as well start by talking about just that, because there are those who think that there's no such thing as a tweener character in wrestling. They think in the end you are either heel or face when all is said and done. Now, why is that? Well, while they won't deny that there are definitely some characters that play fast and loose with their affiliations, they do feel at the end of the day a wrestler will always fall on one side of the line or the other. And when looking at wrestler feuds, people who feel this way may have a point. The alleged tweeners are going to end up taking the opposite stance of whatever their opponent is by default. Right? Well, not exactly, because if that were true, then heel versus heel matches or babyface versus babyface feuds wouldn't be possible, now would it? But let's also look at another argument. Let's look at fan reaction. Because there are some wrestlers that are very polarizing amongst fans, wildly cheered by some but feverishly booed by others. Some would define these characters as tweeners because the masses are split on how they feel about them. However, many in the anti-tweener camp will claim that fan feelings are just not a part of the equation. It's how the character is booked that matters and nothing more, believing that bookers book wrestling and not the people. Now, unfortunately, that's just another example of how some really don't register the importance of fans in wrestling, but I guess we're all kind of used to that by now, aren't we? Anyway, fan reaction does matter. I cannot stress that enough, because there are numerous cases of wrestlers that went from being heel or face and vice versa simply because of how they took to the crowd. Yes, ultimately booking made the decision, but it was nothing more than a chain reaction set off by the wrestling community. Now sure, sometimes management does ignore the signs, but that tends to be in their own disinterest. Furthermore, when fans aren't reacting, management sees this as a wrestler not getting over, and indifference is the least desired outcome in all of professional wrestling. Love it or hate it, at least you're experiencing something. Apathy means that wrestling is failing to captivate you. So with all that, it shows just how important fan reactions are, and that they do have a place in booking decisions. However, let's make it perfectly clear that indifference is not what we're looking for from a tweener. We definitely don't want a neutral audience. Of course, wrestling wants an audience that cares, but it doesn't necessarily want to manipulate the audience's reactions one way or the other. A true tweener is a character that exists to be loved or hated depending upon the audience's interpretation of their actions. Treating the audience not as one group, but as individuals free to make up their own minds, knowing that some will feel one way while others will feel differently. And that's the real goal of booking a tweener. And it's totally okay, just as long as whatever the audience feels is strong and genuine. Now, with all that being said, what exactly makes me so sure that that's what the WWE wants? How do I know that that's the booking strategy that they set out for in hopes of being successful? Well, maybe it's because they already told us so. Let's go back to a segment called The Cure for the Common Show. Now, this often overlooked moment is one that some believe to be the unofficial start of the Attitude Era. To summarize, in this segment, Vince McMahon himself would declare that the old convention of the classic good guy versus bad guy motif was passé and insulting to the audience's intelligence, and that we the fans must be growing tired of it. He would also go on to say that they would be offering a more robust form of entertainment for contemporary times. And with this mentality, WWF would go on to new heights of success never seen before. But now, perhaps WWE is looking to repeat this procedure as tweeners seem to be making a bit of a comeback in the company. Sure, not all of them are successes, but I think we can still note something of a pattern here. Certain wrestlers who are cheered by children but yet booed by adults are by definition tweeners. And while they may not be all that popular with the ratings, they do tend to sell a lot of merchandise. But let's look at some other examples, like Brock Lesnar. This is a wrestler that for years now has gone back and forth on whether he gets cheered or booed from fans. He really is a neutral character in terms of motivation and dynamic. And WWE can use him as a utility player since he can be whatever they need him to be, on the few times that he actually does show up. But furthermore, let's look at Dean Ambrose as of late, or Elias, Kevin Owens, The Miz, Braun Strowman, Charlotte Flair, or Becky Lynch. While lately, all of them have played in both good and bad waters, settling into one role or another after a while, they have also all had time periods where they received different crowd reactions than what their typical heel-face role would normally designate for them. And also, let's just go back and look at, of course, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Back in 1996, while he was behaving as what was a classic heel persona for the time, Austin began to get over. And while his on-screen rival Bret Hart was behaving in a traditional babyface role, the fans began to turn on him. Shifting attitudes of the time and playing up the America vs. Canada gimmick allowed both men to jump back and forth on being heel or face depending on their circumstances. Of course, there were definitive times where they were distinctly playing one role or the other, but overall, you can see how they were playing both sides of this fence. Now, when we look at all these examples, it's clear that they have mixed results in terms of success. So why are there people who are looking for tweeners as the answer to the modern day creative slump? Well, to answer that, let's just look at one last reason why people have a tweener aversion to begin with, because it has to do with cultural bias. The Western mentality, as it derives from European concepts, tends to subscribe to the method of analysis known as deconstruction, which tends to understand something by simply knowing what its relationship is to whatever it is not. For example, I know what left is because I know that it's not right, and I know what right is because it's the opposite of left. But the problem with this is that on its own, it tends to promote binary thinking, separating everything into either one of two categories. This excludes other possibilities and forgoes nuance and gray areas. And furthermore, when we look at American culture in particular, we see that Americans are quite prone to binary thinking. Expanding our view a little further out, sure, other countries have heels and faces too, but many of the other big wrestling cultures out there are nowhere near as polarized on the subject as we are. Mexico has their good guys and bad guys who are called Technicos and Rudos, but they also have a third category, the Exotico, which is its own thing and not inherently heel or face. Also, let's look at Japan. The line between heels and faces are blurred many times, with it not always being clear. Sure, there are some that are definitely good or bad, but as a whole, wrestlers are just wrestlers, and their actions speak louder than their booking. And with some clamoring for wrestling to be more like other sports, well, this is exactly how you get there. In boxing or MMA, competitors are not good or bad, they just are. Fans are free to cheer or boo whoever they want for whatever reason they want. And there's no booking committee trying to manipulate how the crowd feels or tell them that they need to react a specific way. And with some criticizing modern wrestling fans for cheering heels and booing faces, thinking that people are just being obstinate, maybe it's time to realize that fans feel how they feel, and it's not the fans who are wrong, but rather the booking that is. And maybe, just maybe, two options aren't enough, and perhaps they never were to begin with. But what do you think? Do tweeners exist? And if so, who are your favorite examples? Let me know down in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe right here to Dave Knows Wrestling. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, Dave knows.